I met Natalie in the most ordinary way, at a friend's birthday dinner, the kind you almost skip after a long week, but end up glad you showed up for. She was sitting at the far end of the table, sipping a glass of white wine and laughing at some joke I didn't hear. I remember being struck by how naturally she fit into the group, even though I later found out she barely knew anyone there. She had this energy that made people feel like they'd known her for years, and I was no exception. We got to talking during dessert, the kind of conversation that just keeps flowing, skipping from favorite books to weird childhood injuries to the worst songs we secretly loved. There was no pressure, no performance, just two people genuinely enjoying each other's company. By the end of the night, I was walking her to her car, and before she pulled away, she looked at me and said, "Let's not pretend we don't want to keep talking." That's how it started. Our first official date was a casual brunch the following weekend. We talked for nearly 3 hours, long after our plates were cleared. The more I learned about her, the more I wanted to know. She worked in nonprofit event planning, and I was in IT at a logistics firm. We joked about how she was always surrounded by people and how I was usually hiding from them. Somehow it just worked. We balanced each other out in the best way. Over time, our relationship fell into a rhythm that felt effortless. We moved in together after a year, a little apartment above a bookstore that smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. We cooked together most nights, nothing fancy, just comfort food and conversation. Friday nights were reserved for takeout and a movie, and Saturdays were usually spent running errands that somehow still felt fun when we were doing them side by side. We didn't need grand adventures. Being together was enough. 2 years later, I proposed. I had the ring tucked into a shoebox, an inside joke from one of our earliest dates, and I asked her to marry me in the same bookstore we'd moved above. She said yes with tears in her eyes and that lopsided smile I'd come to love. We didn't want a huge wedding, so we planned something intimate, a garden ceremony with close family and friends, followed by a laid-back reception where everyone felt comfortable. Married life settled in without much friction. We bought a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it felt like ours from the moment we walked through the door. Natalie decorated with her usual flair. Cozy throws, warm colors, mismatched but charming furniture. I focused on setting up the home office, fixing things myself, building shelves even when I didn't entirely know how. It felt good to build a space that reflected both of us. We traveled when we could, spent Sunday mornings reading on the couch, and always made time for one another, even during the busiest weeks. We had a rhythm, a routine that worked for us. People used to comment on how well we communicated, how comfortable we seemed together. I believed them. I believed in us. Back then, I truly thought we had something rare, a kind of simple happiness that didn't need constant proving. We were just good together. After we got married, it didn't take long for our routines to feel familiar. In fact, that's what I loved most about it. The stability, the sense that I could count on her and she could count on me. We weren't chasing some high. We were building something real. It felt steady in a way that made me feel grounded. Natalie and I both worked full-time, but we always made space for each other. Mornings were a quiet blur of coffee, toast, and shared silence before the day kicked in. Evenings, though, were ours. She'd usually get home first, always playing music in the kitchen while she made dinner. Everything from soul to indie folk, depending on her mood. I'd walk in, drop my keys in the bowl by the door, and the dog would come barreling at me like it had been months, not hours. We'd eat at the dining table most nights, something we promised ourselves we'd do even when we were tired. No screens, just conversation. Some nights we'd talk about work, other times we'd sit in comfortable silence, watching the candle on the table burn down between us. I never thought of marriage as something romanticized. For me, this was the heart of it. That steady presence, the warmth of familiarity. Our home slowly filled with reminders of the life we were building. Photos from weekend getaways, mismatched mugs from local art fairs, bookshelves that doubled as places to store both fiction and old birthday cards. We had a shared calendar taped to the fridge where we marked down everything, from vet appointments to Natalie's book club and Ryan's poker night. Even though I hadn't actually played poker in a year. She had her friends, I had mine, but there was this effortless overlap in our lives. Her best friend, Marla, became someone I'd text from time to time, usually about surprise gifts or when I needed help picking out a birthday idea. And she got along well with my coworkers, joining us for the occasional team dinner or holiday party. Everyone always said we were a good match, the kind of couple that didn't need to perform their love to prove it. We took a few bigger trips during those years, Seattle, Portland, even a short trip to Iceland that turned into one of our favorite shared memories. I still have a picture of her wrapped in a giant parka, standing near the edge of a black sand beach, grinning like she'd never been happier. She used to say that was her favorite version of herself, outdoors, somewhere new, with me behind the camera. We never fought about anything serious. Sure, we had our tiffs, who forgot to buy detergent, who left the back door open so the dog tracked in mud, but we were good at resolving things. We didn't let resentment build. At least, I didn't. I always felt like we were aligned. That even when we disagreed, we were working toward the same life, the same goals. That trust ran deep. Looking back on those years, I remember a lot of laughter. I remember early Saturday mornings when she'd sleep in and I'd bring her coffee in bed. I remember rainy days spent watching old movies under a blanket and summer nights where we sat on the porch just listening to the world go quiet. They weren't grand gestures, but they were ours. We had something solid, something I didn't think needed questioning. And at the time, I truly believed that what we had would last forever. As the years went by, the sense of ease between Natalie and me only deepened. If anything, we settled even more fully into each other. We weren't newlyweds anymore, and that initial excitement had mellowed into something more lasting, familiarity, comfort, a kind of love that felt lived in rather than performed. I know people sometimes talk about the spark fading after a while, but with us, it wasn't that it faded. It just changed into something steadier, softer, but still strong. We had our routines, yes, but we weren't stuck in them. We still surprised each other. I'd come home some nights to find she'd rearranged the living room or decided we were trying a new recipe from one of her cooking shows. Other times, she'd text me out of the blue in the middle of the day to meet her at some new cafe that had just opened. It kept things light. It kept things alive. Every Sunday morning was our time. We had this tradition: pancakes, music playing low in the background, and no phones. Just the two of us at the kitchen table, talking about the week, dreaming about the future. Sometimes it was little things, redoing the guest room, maybe getting a new grill, and sometimes it was bigger ideas, like saving for a cabin up north where we could one day spend summers. There was something about how we planned together that made me feel secure, like we were always thinking ahead together. Work life was steady. I'd gotten promoted again, which brought longer hours, but Natalie understood. She was doing well in her own career, too. She'd moved into a more senior position at the nonprofit she worked for, which meant more evening events and weekend fundraisers. But even with both of us busy, we never lost that closeness. She'd send me photos from her events, dressed up and smiling with board members or guests, and I'd always reply with a compliment, sometimes a cheesy emoji, always a reminder that I was proud of her. She did the same whenever I hit milestones or had tough days. There was this mutual sense of support that kept us grounded. We hosted friends often, game nights, dinners, casual barbecues in the backyard when the weather was good. She was always the more social one, planning menus, setting the table just right, lighting candles even for small get-togethers. People loved coming to our place. It had a kind of warmth to it, a vibe that made people linger even after the music stopped. And I liked seeing her in that element, so effortlessly at ease, the center of the evening without even trying to be. Our friends used to comment on how well we worked together. "You two make it look easy," one of them said at a dinner party. And I remember Natalie squeezing my hand under the table and smiling at me in this way that made me feel like we were exactly where we were meant to be. I believed in what we had. I felt lucky. Not in some naive way, but in the kind of way you feel when you've built something slowly and carefully, brick by brick, year by year, and you can see the shape of it, and it's good. It's home. There was nothing, in those years, that made me question our bond. Not even once. I'd have put my whole future on the table and bet on us. And I'd have done it with absolute certainty. I remember the night she brought it up. It was a Wednesday, nothing remarkable about the day. I'd come home late after a rough meeting, tired, ready to sink into the couch and just exist quietly for a while. Natalie was already home, sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine and her laptop open in front of her. I thought she was just catching up on work emails or planning another one of her weekend fundraiser events. She waited until we were both in the living room, the dog curled between us on the couch, some movie playing in the background. She muted the TV and turned toward me with this slightly hesitant smile, the kind she usually wore when she was about to ask for something big. I figured maybe she was planning a surprise trip or there was something expensive she wanted to buy. But instead, she said, "Can I ask you something? Kind of personal?" I shrugged, smiled back. "Of course. What's up?" She didn't get there right away. She took a breath, ran her finger around the rim of her wine glass, then said, "What do you think about open relationships?" The words didn't register right away. I laughed a little, half expecting a punchline. But her expression stayed still, serious, almost cautious. I sat up a little straighter. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I understood exactly what she meant. She tried to frame it gently, said she'd been reading about couples who'd explored it, that it had supposedly made their relationship stronger, brought them closer, deepened their communication. "It's not about not loving you," she said. "It's just curiosity, growth, space to explore without hurting what we have." I didn't respond right away. My mind was moving slower than usual, like it didn't want to process what she'd just dropped in my lap. Eventually, I said, "I'm not interested in sharing you. That's just not who I am." She didn't argue. She didn't even look upset, just nodded slowly and said, "Okay. I just wanted to ask. I thought we could talk about it." I remember feeling a strange mix of things afterward. Confused, mostly. Not angry, just unsure. We'd never talked about anything like that before. It seemed to come out of nowhere. And yet, she'd asked so calmly, like she'd rehearsed it. Like it had been on her mind longer than I realized. That night, we went to bed without really saying much else. I kissed her goodnight like always, but something felt different. Not broken, not yet. Just shifted. I didn't think it was anything serious at the time. I chalked it up to one of those conversations couples have as they evolve. New ideas, new ways of thinking. We were both getting older. Maybe she was just exploring thoughts out loud. But still, something stuck with me. Something in her tone, her timing, the way she accepted my answer without pushing, without seeming disappointed. Almost like she already knew what I'd say. Almost like she already had another plan. In the weeks after our conversation about an open relationship, things returned to normal, at least on the surface. We still had our routines. She still made us coffee in the mornings. We still watched shows together at night, still shared takeout on Fridays, and did groceries together on Sundays. But something in the air had shifted. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was like living in a house where the furniture had been subtly rearranged, just enough that you'd occasionally stub your toe and not know why. Natalie was still affectionate, still warm, but her attention started to drift in strange ways. There were moments when I'd talk to her and she'd nod along, but clearly wasn't listening. Her phone started going everywhere with her, not just into other rooms, but into the bathroom, even when we were brushing our teeth side by side. That hadn't been her habit before. At first, I told myself I was being overly sensitive. Maybe I was. Maybe I was just reacting to that one conversation, trying to find things that weren't there because I didn't like the idea she had proposed. But something about her presence felt thinner, like she was physically here but not fully with me. I started noticing how she smiled less when we were alone and laughed more when she was texting someone. I'd catch her typing quickly, then flipping the phone face down if I happened to glance in her direction. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to come off as paranoid. Besides, there wasn't anything concrete. No late-night absences, no mysterious phone calls. Just a feeling, one that grew quietly, like a shadow stretching under the door. She started going out more. Said she was reconnecting with some old friends, a few from college I didn't know well. I told her that sounded nice. She'd come home with stories, sometimes detailed, sometimes vague. Once or twice I asked follow-up questions, but she'd pivot quickly, as if the night was already fading in her memory. "It was just drinks, nothing crazy," she'd say with a quick smile. "We just needed to vent about work." And maybe that was true. Maybe I was looking too hard at the seams of things. But there were nights when she'd come home hours later than she said she would, smelling like a perfume I didn't recognize, not hers. Something deeper, sharper, unfamiliar. When I asked if she had a new bottle, she said she'd tried a sample from a coworker. That seemed reasonable enough. But I remembered how Natalie used to let me pick her perfumes. It was always a little ritual we shared. I started sleeping more lightly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and realize she wasn't beside me. I'd find her downstairs, scrolling her phone in the dark, saying she couldn't sleep. I didn't press. I just kissed her shoulder and went back to bed. Still, a part of me had begun to wonder, had that question, the one about the open relationship, been more than a question? Was it a boundary check? Was it permission seeking? Or maybe just a formality before doing what she was already planning? I didn't know. I didn't want to know. Not yet. But something had changed. I could feel it in the silence between our words, in the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when I told her I loved her. And no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the distance between us was slowly starting to take shape. It's strange how silence becomes louder over time. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of connection, the space where there used to be warmth, now filled with doubt. That's what I began to notice more than anything else, the quiet between us. Natalie and I still moved through our days like a married couple, brushing our teeth side by side, folding laundry together on the weekends, making plans for things neither of us seemed truly excited about. But there was a disconnect I couldn't name, something that hovered just outside my reach. She was busier than ever, or at least that's what she told me. More events, more meetings, more late-night calls with colleagues planning fundraisers and strategies. I didn't want to be the husband who didn't support his wife's ambitions, so I nodded and gave her space. I trusted her, or at least I tried to, but there were moments when that trust felt like it was being stretched thin. I started keeping mental notes without meaning to. Who she said she was meeting. When she said she'd be home. What excuse she gave if she was late. I wasn't trying to build a case. I was just trying to make the picture in my head line up with the one in front of me. One night, I made dinner, something she used to love, a roasted chicken recipe I hadn't pulled out in months. I lit a candle, set the table, even opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. It wasn't an anniversary or anything. I just wanted a night that felt like us again. She texted that she'd be late, but didn't say why. She got home 2 hours later, apologizing with a distracted smile and a kiss on the cheek. She picked at the food, said she was exhausted, then scrolled her phone under the table. I didn't say anything. I just watched her, trying to read something in the curve of her smile or the shape of her eyes. But whatever it was, she wasn't giving it away. There were other small things, the way she'd angle her phone when she typed, the sudden surge in gym visits after years of not caring much, the way she'd laugh a little too hard at something she was reading, and then change the subject when I asked what it was. One afternoon, I picked up her phone by reflex to silence a call while she was in the shower, and I swear I saw a flash of a name I didn't recognize before the screen went black. Just a first name, nothing more. But when I mentioned it later, she waved it off like it was someone from work. You wouldn't know him, she said. Then changed the subject before I could respond. I still hadn't confronted her. Part of me didn't want to go looking for something I couldn't unsee. But another part of me, the part that was now lying awake at night, watching her sleep with her back to me, was starting to feel like a fool. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, if I was being paranoid or just finally paying attention. But the woman I used to share everything with now felt like a stranger wearing my wife's face. I told myself over and over, maybe she's just tired. Maybe this is just a rough patch. Maybe all long-term couples go through phases like this, where the conversation runs dry and the spark flickers. But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. Something had changed. Something was missing. And the worst part was, I didn't know if it was her or if it was me. There's a certain weight that comes with not knowing. It settles into your bones, follows you around in silence, makes every laugh feel slightly off and every quiet moment stretch a little too long. I tried to carry that weight for as long as I could, convincing myself I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into the small cracks that had appeared in our marriage. But over time, that weight became harder to ignore. I found myself doing things I never thought I would. Subtle things, quiet things. I wasn't proud of it, still not, but I started paying closer attention. When she left the room, I'd glance at her phone screen just to see if any notifications popped up. When she said she was going out with friends, I'd check the time she left and the time she came back. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask, but I was no longer pretending not to notice. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon when I found it, the second phone. I wasn't looking for it. I was actually searching for an old photo album we kept in the guest room closet. I reached up onto the top shelf, pulling down a shoebox I thought held prints from one of our trips, but instead I found something else. A small, black phone, no case, no stickers, nothing personal. Just a phone. I stared at it for a long minute, like I'd accidentally picked up something that didn't belong in our house. I didn't turn it on. I didn't open anything. I just held it in my hand, heart pounding, trying to make sense of why it was there. When Natalie got home later that day, I didn't mention it. I'd already put the phone back exactly where I found it. I told myself there might be a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe it was old. Maybe it didn't even work anymore. but something about it gnawed at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to her, listening to her breathe, wondering who she really was when I wasn't looking. There had been a time when I would have said I knew her better than anyone. Now, I wasn't sure if I even knew where she spent her evenings or who she texted when her fingers flew over the keyboard and she smiled at something I couldn't see. A few days later, when she went out again for drinks with the girls, I did something I'd never done in our entire marriage. I took the second phone and turned it on. It was locked. Of course it was. But the background image wasn't one of us. It wasn't her usual wallpaper. It was just black, completely blank, anonymous. It sent a chill down my spine. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. That phone wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't for casual use. It was hidden. And things that are hidden usually have a reason for being that way. I put it back. I didn't open it again. But the seed of doubt had become something more. Not just unease. Not just suspicion. Now, it was something close to certainty. Not the kind you can prove in words, but the kind that sits heavy in your chest and makes every moment feel like it's ticking towards something inevitable. Still, I said nothing. I went about my days. I kissed her goodnight. I acted like the husband I had always been. But inside, I was bracing for impact. There's a difference between suspecting something and knowing it. For weeks, maybe even months, I've been circling that edge, feeling the discomfort, sensing the disconnection, watching the story between us shift in ways I couldn't quite name. But nothing prepares you for the moment that suspicion becomes certainty. It's not satisfying. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like grief arriving all at once. It was a Thursday night. Natalie had gone to bed early, claiming she had a headache. I stayed up, not really doing anything, just sitting in the living room with the TV on low, mine somewhere else entirely. After a while, I stood up, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. The bedroom was dark, her back turned to me, breathing slow and even. I was about to change into a t-shirt and crawl into bed when I realized she'd left something on the edge of her nightstand, the second phone. It was face up this time. The screen had lit up with a message. I didn't mean to read it. I hadn't planned to. But it was right there. A video message, sent from someone simply saved as M. No last name. No emoji. Just that initial. And under it, a preview image, her, in what I could only describe as something intimate, lying in a hotel bed I didn't recognize. The timestamp was from earlier that night. I stared at it for a long time, as if looking at it long enough would cause it to disappear or change into something else. But it didn't. The truth was just sitting there, silent, waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't play the video. I didn't need to. I quietly walked back downstairs and sat on the edge of the couch in the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stared at the wall and let the wave of it pass over me, the betrayal, the humiliation, the finality of knowing. Everything I had tried to protect, to preserve, to believe in, all of it had already been broken, long before I realized it. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me goodbye, told me she'd be late because of another meeting, and walked out the door with her coffee in hand. I watched her leave, wondering how long it had been like this. How many times she'd smiled at me while carrying this other life in her back pocket. I didn't tell her I knew. Not yet. I needed time to breathe, to think, to understand the version of my life I was suddenly living in. That day, I went to work like normal, answered emails, sat through meetings, but every second, the image of that video icon stayed with me, burning in the back of my mind. Not just because of what it showed, but because of how easily she had hidden it. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming match, no broken plates, no midnight arguments under flickering lights. The moment I realized she'd been lying to me, truly, deeply lying, something inside me just shut off. Like a breaker being flipped in the middle of a storm. 1 second, I was drowning in questions. The next, there was only silence. Cold, clear, cutting silence. And in that silence, something else rose. Anger. Not the flailing kind that lashes out, but the quiet, deliberate kind. The kind that sees things with terrifying clarity. The day after I saw that video icon on her hidden phone, I didn't sleep. I stayed up in the guest room, thinking, remembering, reliving years that now felt like a trick mirror. I thought about the dinners we cooked together, the weekends we spent planning our future, the inside jokes, the nights we held hands in bed and whispered about growing old. And all the while, she had been building something else, somewhere else, with someone else. When morning came, I got dressed as usual. I packed a few things into a duffel bag, not my clothes, but hers. The dresses I had bought her for our anniversaries. The jewelry she had once said she couldn't live without. The books she claimed were part of her soul. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't yell. I simply packed her life into neat, impersonal bundles. Then I changed the locks on the house. I called a locksmith while she was at work, stood outside with my coffee while the man removed the mechanisms that once welcomed her in. I left everything she owned on the porch. Shoes, handbags, coats, her favorite plant. Her car was in my name, a gift I'd given her last Christmas. I kept it. I kept the receipts too, just in case she wanted to fight me on that. I wasn't angry for the material things. I was angry for the memories attached to them, for how easily she'd used them as props in the fiction she built around us. Then I took her second phone, the one I wasn't supposed to know about, and placed it right on top of her things. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to. She would know. She tried calling that evening. I let it ring. Again and again. Then came the texts. Can we talk? Please, I'm sorry. It's not what you think. Then silence. Then more calls. I didn't answer. I didn't even look. I just sat by the window with a drink and stared out at the driveway where her car used to be, listening to the wind push against the glass like it was trying to say something I couldn't hear. In a moment I can't even explain now, I did something I never thought I'd be capable of. Her sister had once confided in me about her own lonely marriage, her frustrations, her pain. We had always had a strange closeness, one we never crossed. But that night, I did cross it. I called her, and when she came over, I told her everything. She listened. She didn't speak for a long time. And then, in the stillness of that broken evening, we became each other's escape. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sweet. It was messy and raw and desperate. Two people grieving different versions of the same betrayal. I filmed it. I didn't even know why. Maybe part of me wanted her to feel what I felt. The shock, the helplessness, the gut punch of finding out something you thought was safe had already been hollowed out. I sent the video to Natalie the next morning with a single message. I know everything. I haven't heard from her since. The house felt different after she was gone. Not just empty, lighter. It was strange how quickly her absence rearranged the air, how much space silence could take up. For days, maybe weeks, I drifted through the rooms like I didn't belong in them anymore. The kitchen where we used to talk about our days now echoed. The bed felt too large. Her toothbrush sat untouched in the cup by the sink until I finally threw it out one morning without a word. The text stopped after the video. Maybe she was embarrassed. Maybe she was angry. Maybe she finally realized she didn't have control anymore. Her sister never called again either. What happened between us was a moment. Intense, flawed, and not meant to last. But in its own way, it was closure. A final severing of the world I thought I knew. I took some time off work. Said I needed to deal with personal things, and surprisingly, no one asked questions. Maybe I wore it in my face more than I realized. For a while, I filled my days with small tasks, repainting the guest room, fixing the leaky faucet, reorganizing drawers that had gone untouched for years. It sounds mundane, but there was comfort in reclaiming my space one detail at a time. I started going on long drives without any destination. I'd find myself on back roads just outside town, windows down, music low, thinking more clearly than I had in months. No phone buzzing. No pretending. Just me and the hum of the engine and the slow unraveling of grief. And somewhere in that quiet, something started to shift. Not quickly. Not cleanly. But I began to feel a little more like myself again. I started writing in a journal, not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote down everything. The confusion, the pain, the anger, the disbelief. And then, eventually, I started writing about what I wanted. Who I wanted to be after all of this. What kind of life I wanted to live, now that the one I'd built had been torn down. A few months later, I met someone. It wasn't planned, it never is, really. Her name was Elise, and we met at a coffee shop I'd never been to before. She was reading something by the window, and we struck up a conversation over a shared frustration about the line. It was simple, honest, and unremarkable, except it felt nothing like everything that came before. There was no weight to it. No expectations. Just ease. We started seeing each other slowly. No games, no pressure. I told her early on that I was healing from something heavy, and she didn't flinch. She listened. She didn't try to fix it, didn't ask for the whole story. She just met me where I was. And maybe that's what healing looks like. Not pretending nothing happened. Not rushing to replace what was lost. But learning to sit with the damage, accept it, and then, piece by piece, choosing to move forward anyway. It's a strange thing, looking back on a life you thought was yours. There are moments I replay sometimes, not out of pain, but because they feel like they belong to someone else. Sunday mornings in the kitchen, laughing over pancakes. Late nights curled on the couch with a glass of wine. The sound of her keys in the door. All of it once felt like home. Now, it's like watching an old movie where you already know the ending. The plot hasn't changed, but the meaning has. I used to wonder when exactly it all began, when the distance crept in, when the lies took root. I used to dig for signs I missed, little moments I brushed off that now felt obvious in hindsight. But eventually, I stopped needing those answers. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I'd made it out. Not untouched, but intact. Elise and I are doing well. It's not a perfect story. No story ever is. But it's honest. We laugh a lot. We talk about everything, even the hard things. There's no pretending, no second-guessing what a look means or what silence is hiding. I told her once, during one of those long, quiet nights, that I don't expect things to always be easy. I just need them to be real. She understood that. My ex never reached out again. Neither did her sister. Whatever she felt after that final message, she kept it to herself. I assume she moved on, maybe even with him, maybe not. I don't care. It's not my story anymore. I've stopped watching from the sidelines, stopped wondering what they're doing, who they're blaming, what they say about me. That part of my life is closed. I've locked that door and thrown away the key. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't even losing the future I thought we were building. It was losing the version of myself who believed in all of it without question. The man who thought love was enough, that loyalty was a given. I had to grieve him. But now, standing on the other side, I realize I didn't lose everything. I just let go of what was never mine to begin with. If you're reading this and you're where I was questioning, hurting, afraid to know the truth, I won't tell you it gets better right away. But I will tell you it gets clearer. You stop clinging to the version of love you were promised, and you start reaching for the version that finally reaches back. Because in the end, healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about remembering who you were before it did, and choosing to be even stronger than that.